In the Haggadah, it states that the Jews in Egypt were Matsuyanim. What does that mean?
It states in the Torah, in Sefer Devarim, Deuteronomy, that the Jewish people, having gone down to Egypt, Mitzrayim, remained a separate and distinct people. In fact, a great and very numerous people. It states in the Pasuk, Wahi Sham Leroy Gadol Arsum Warav. They became there a great and very numerous nation. The word Goy means a nation, a distinct nation that can be easily be distinguished from other nations. And on this Pasuk, Hazal explained and commented, Melamed, the fact that it became a Goy, Melamed she Yisrael hayu sham Matsuyanim. Matsuyan, the term Matsuyan means to stand out, to be noticeable, to be different. In the same way that we find in the Talmud Bavli, in Masechet Shabbat, Daf Kof Mem Hamud Beth, 145b, the Talmud there states that Torah scholars, Talmidei Chachamim Shel Bavel in Babylon, were usually Matsuyanim, as opposed to the Torah scholars in Eretz Yisrael. In other words, the Torah scholars in Bavel, it was normal practice for them to stand out, to be different in terms of their clothing. As Rashi explains over there, that a person who wishes to be looked up to and look different from others, dresses up in a certain way, perhaps in a more expensive, more impressive fashion, in a manner that he will stand out and be counted, be seen to be different, to be unique. In the case of Talmidei Chachamim, Torah scholars in Bavel, the aim was to proclaim that you belong to the class of Torah scholars, that you are someone who places great emphasis on the study of the Torah. For reasons that we won't go into now, this was the practice amongst the Talmidei Chachamim in Bavel, and not of the Talmidei Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael. Apparently in the land of Israel this was not the common practice, even amongst the Torah scholars. But the purpose of being Matsuyan is to stand out, to be different, to be noticeable and distinguishable, and to belong to a certain group. In the same way, when Hazal tell us that the Jews in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, were Matsuyanim, this means to say that they stood out. They were different. They did not try to be like the Egyptians around them. And this is why we find in the Midrash, in the same context, the statement that the Jews in Mitzrayim did not change their names, lo shinu et shemam, lo shinu et malbushehem, they did not change their clothing, etc. They did not try to fit in with the Egyptian fashion of the day. They did not name their children, give them Egyptian names in order to better assimilate and be part of the general society and general culture. The Jews knew that they were different and they wished to be different. And this is a very important and essential lesson for every Jew, for each and every one of us. And in fact, it's also a very important lesson for non-Jews as well. Non-Jews should know, just as Jews need to know, that Jews are different. Jews are not supposed to be the same as the Gentile population, not in terms of their philosophy of life, their attitude towards the most basic questions about human existence, not in terms of our religious and theological notions, and also not in terms of more external things, such as dress, such as wearing a beard, such as by what name you are known, etc. All these more external indications of the fact that so-and-so is a Jew are of course expressions, outward expressions of an inner difference. The fact that the Jew is different in his dress, in his speech, in the name that he is known by, etc., is a reminder and an indication, something that we should not be able to get away from, not be able to forget, that we are different in a more fundamental and meaningful way. That is to say, we are not supposed to think, and certainly not to act, like the Gentile nations around us. These essential concepts which lie at the core of being Jewish, what it means to be Jewish and to remain Jewish and not be influenced by foreign cultures and foreign thinking. All this is mentioned by the Rambam briefly in Ilchot Avodah Zorah V'Chukot HaGoyim, Perek 11, the 11th chapter. He writes as follows: En holechim b'chukot hagoyim v'lo midamim lahem. Jews are not to walk in the ways of the Gentile nations, not to act like them, and we should aim not to be similar to them. Lo b'malbush, not in our dress, v'lo b'se'ar, and not in the way we wear our hair, in our haircuts. Shne'emar, as it says, v'lo telechu b'chukot hagoy, do not walk in the ways and follow the practices of the nations. As it says also in another pasuk, u'b'chukotahem lo telechu, you shall not tread along that path, not copy their behavior in any way. Rambam goes on to say, Shelo yidameh lahem, the Jews should not be similar to them. Ela yeh ha'Yisraeli, the Jews should be muvdal mehem, be separate. V'yadua b'malbusho, even in his dress, even in more external ways, he should be different. U'b'shar ma'asaw, in other actions, other more external, noticeable aspects of his behavior, of his life. Kumoshu muvdal, just as he is separate and different from them, b'mada'o, in his thoughts, in his philosophy, in his thinking. U'v'de'otho, the term de'oth here does not mean what people sometimes mistakenly understand, the way they understand the term today. The way it would be normally understood today would be opinions or attitudes, etc. In other words, would be synonymous with the term thoughts, with the previous word the Rambam used, mada'o. Here, in the Rambam's usage of the word, de'otho refers to a person's behavior, the way he behaves, the way he comports himself, the way he does everything in his life in a manner which is an expression of his outlook on the world, on his connection to Hashem. All these things should be manifest in all things that he does, in all manner of behavior, dress, outward appearance, and of course, even more important, in the way that the Jew thinks and looks at things and understands the most basic ideas and questions which are at the basis of all human existence. Why are we here, and what are we supposed to be doing with ourselves when we are here? And therefore Rambam goes on to say, Lo yidbash b'malbush hamiyuhad lahem. A Jew should not wear clothing which is known to be that which non-Jews wear. V'lo yigadel sisith. Here it's referring to wearing one's hair, having one's hair cut in a way which is immediately seen or understood to be the haircut, the style of non-Jews. All these different aspects, says Rambam, of a Jew's external appearance are important because they are a reminder both to himself, to his surroundings, and to the Gentile world around him, that he is not like the Gentile in his actions, in his thoughts, and in his Torah, in his Mada', in his knowledge, in his understanding, in his opinions, in his attitudes. all these ideas are part and parcel of what Chazal say when they remark that the Jews in Mitzrayim were Matsuyanim, they were separate. Now this statement was made with regards to the Jews in Mitzrayim, even though we know that the Jews in Mitzrayim were not entirely successful in remaining aloof from all manner of idolatrous practices that they picked up from the Egyptian society in which they lived. In other words, the Jews were unfortunately affected by their surroundings, which is a normal state of affairs. In other words, it's very difficult to live amongst foreign nations, to be constantly surrounded by and bombarded by foreign ideas, ideologies, religions, attitudes, and not be affected by these things. It is in fact very difficult, and this is exactly why we have to struggle always and fight against this natural tendency to assimilate to one's surroundings. And that is why even the external expressions and manifestations of this difference, of this being unique and independent in mind, in thought, in practice, in dress, all these things are all part and should be part of a Jew's self-identity. This basic lesson, it seems to me, has been forgotten by, unfortunately, by many Jews. And I'm not referring here to Jews who are unfortunately very far removed from Torah and Mitzvot, Jews who are not religious because perhaps they were not brought up in a religious home, they did not receive a Jewish education worthy of its name, etc. In such cases, it's easy to understand, unfortunately, why such a person is very assimilated and very much like his Gentile neighbor, and in fact thinks probably exactly like his Gentile neighbor, and that in fact is a tragedy, of course. But we can understand why this is. It is, however, much more curious and in many ways more disturbing when we find Jews who are ostensibly religious. They perform the mitzvot of the Torah, or many of the mitzvot at least of the Torah. Shall we say they keep Shabbat, they would never think of eating chametz on Pesach. It goes without saying that they wouldn't marry a non-Jew, they wouldn't want their children to marry non-Jews, and many other essential, fundamental aspects of the Torah. All these things are self-evident to these people, and yet on many ideological issues we find many such Jews are thinking essentially like non-Jews. Their actions, their external actions are essentially Jewish, or so they claim, and very often they are. Sometimes perhaps not, but very often they go through the motions of being a Torah Jew, but in terms of their thought processes, in terms of their values and the issues that excite them, the things with which they identify, the things that they focus on in life, that they dedicate themselves to, that they perhaps will donate money to, etc. These issues very often are dictated not by the Torah, as they should be, but rather by their surroundings, by the non-Jewish surroundings. This is easily understood if the fact that such things occur, that such Jews can exist, that can live this kind of dual existence of going through the motions of being Jewish in many aspects of their Jewishness, of their behavior, of their life, and yet in many other very, very important aspects of their life, their thoughts, their attitudes, their values, they really are not thinking in Jewish terms at all. This phenomenon is readily understood, perhaps more readily understood, when a Jew lives amongst non-Jews. And yet we need to know that even here in Israel, this phenomenon is not at all unknown. There are many Jews who are, again, ostensibly Jewish, ostensibly religious, observant, and yet their thoughts, their ideas, their attitudes, their values are not really dictated by the Torah and are not in consonance with the Torah. A certain wise man whom I know once expressed this idea to me in the following terms. He said, such Jews are really mishtamdim. The term mishtamdim means basically Hellenized Jews. In other words, outwardly they perform the mitzvot, they lead a religious life, but really, deep down inside, they think like non-Jews. They have been subverted by foreign ideas and ideologies. This is a very serious, major issue that we, the Jewish people, must address. And there is no better time to think about this fact and to reverse this trend than Pesach, because all Jews, including those Jews who perhaps act like Jews but don't always think like Jews, all Jews, all religious Jews, all Jews who have a Seder on Pesach will say in the Haggadah the words that the Jewish people in Mitzrayim were Matsuyanim. They stood out, they were different. And that is the important lesson, one of the most important lessons that we can take away from Pesach, from Leil HaSeder. The Jewish people are different, and not just outwardly, not just in name, not just in appearance or formally. We are different in the most essential and the most fundamental, in the most meaningful way. In other words, we think differently. Judaism is not just about doing certain things, it is also about thinking and internalizing the essential concepts, values, precepts, and aims of the Torah.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.